A low, thrumming vibration rattled the fluid in the navigation basin. The shadow falling across the fleet was not a rogue planet. It was manufactured metal, stretching so wide it eclipsed the local star cluster. Song Captain Velmuth watched the impossibly vast superstructure ignite. He breathed in. He forgot to breathe out. His massive lungs held air like a secret. Have you ever encountered something in the dark so massive it made you forget how to breathe? That same icy stillness in the water, he had first felt it 3 cycles earlier, drifting through a barren radiation stream that tasted faintly of ozone and old iron. The drift congregation sang to the stars. Thesauri did not build ships of metal. They were the ships. Their massive, whale-like bodies swam through the hard vacuum, feeding on the rich solar winds. Velmuth's bioluminescent scar tissue, a jagged streak from an ancient asteroid collision, pulsed with a steady, calming rhythm. His song kept the pod together. Silence. A pulse cut through the background cosmic noise. It was an old beacon. It was transmitting on a dead frequency. Nobody used that band anymore. It was too primitive, too prone to degradation across light years. Yet it thumped against Velmuth's sensory nodes with mathematical precision. He altered their course, chasing the rhythmic distress call into a sector of space completely devoid of habitable worlds. What they found made no sense. The energy readings spiking across his neural array defied biological understanding. A typical star produced a staggering 3.8 times 10 to the 26th watts of power. The anomaly ahead of them was somehow capturing a measurable fraction of that output. It was a localized stellar tap, siphoning raw solar energy to power something hidden in the dark, which meant the readings had to be raw. Nothing artificial could handle that thermal load. Velmuth summoned his lead navigator. The younger Thesauri swam alongside him, his own bioluminescence flashing in agitated, erratic patterns. The navigator had been trying to measure the dimensions of the silhouette blocking the distant starlight. "Captain," the navigator transmitted, his telepathic voice laced with deep confusion. "It is either the size of a moon or the size of a small planet. It entirely depends on which way it is facing." Velmuth rumbled a low, subvocal hum. "How can a stationary fortress face a direction?" "That is the exact problem, sir. It is reconfiguring." The fleet drifted closer. The shape in the void sharpened, and it was decidedly not organic. It possessed the hard angles, the relentless symmetry, and the brutal geometry of human design. There were no records of humanity possessing a deep space installation anywhere near this quadrant, let alone one of this magnitude. They were a young species barely crawling out of their own gravity, while still fighting over their own rocks. Yet here stood a monolith of iron and light, drinking directly from a star, silently daring the rest of the galaxy to notice it. If you love exploring the hidden mysteries of the cosmos, join us as we dive deeper into this anomaly. The distress beacon pulsed again. Velmuth tasted the signal in the water-equivalent fluid of his sensory sacs. It was originating from the dead center of the fortress. The structure was completely quiet. No thermal venting, no exhaust trails, just the cold, dormant bulk of a sleeping titan. He ordered the congregation to hold their position. The ambient radiation washed over his scarred flank as he debated whether to approach. Then the exterior lights snapped on. Rows upon rows of illumination cascaded across the metal hull. The scale of the grid was dizzying. The illumination grid stabilized. Millions of artificial lights pierced the deep space gloom. The sheer thermal output washed over Velmuth's sensory nodes. It felt like swimming far too close to a nascent star. His congregation shifted uneasily. Smaller members of the pod bumped against his immense sides. They sought the comfort of his low, rumbling authority. He had absolutely none to offer. Their collective song began to fray at the edges. The navigator transmitted another burst of panicked bioluminescence. The human structure was not just sitting there, it was actively tracking them. Massive sensor arrays, previously hidden in the dark, swiveled with silent, terrifying grace to lock onto the Thesauri pod, mapping their biological density. Then the communication laser struck. It was not a telepathic link. It was raw, weaponized data, translated forcefully into the water-equivalent medium of their sensory sacs. A voice spoke directly in Velmuth's mind. It carried no warmth. It carried no fear. It was flat, absolute, and impossibly calm. Earth doesn't negotiate. Earth informs. The transmission abruptly cut off. The meaning rippled through the congregation. Humans had not stumbled out here by accident. They had claimed this sector. The arrogance of it was staggering. A species bound to dirt and gravity had dragged a fortress into the deep dark, tapped a star, and declared undisputed dominion over the empty vacuum. The shadow of that absolute declaration had fallen across the fleet just as the superstructure eclipsed the star cluster. Velmuth's lungs burned. He held the trapped air, waiting for the defensive batteries to open fire. He waited for the abrupt end of his song. Instead, the data packets from the ancient beacon finished unpacking in his neural array. The final encrypted layers of the signal stripped away. It was never a distress call. The frequency of the signal was highly specific, mathematically perfect, and undeniably deliberate. No other species in the known galaxy communicated on this exact sub-harmonic resonance. The humans had not been broadcasting a desperate plea into the void, hoping a passing ship might hear their cries. They had built a star-powered monolith, anchored it in the absolute black, and perfectly mimicked the deeply complex biological pitch of a thesauri greeting. They knew exactly who lived out here. They knew the routes the congregation took between the stars. The beacon was a meticulously engineered welcome mat left on the threshold of a dead zone, proving they had been listening to the songs of the deep all along. Velmuth stared at the impossible geometry of the human structure, the glowing, bioluminescent scar on his massive flank, a mark of survival that had shone brightly through centuries of cosmic storms, slowly dimmed to a dull, ashen gray. Deep within the cavernous expanse of his chest, the biological rhythm that had beaten steadily for 1,000 cycles simply ceased. His jaw locked tight against the crushing weight of realization. For the very first time in his long, ancient life, surrounded by the cold iron of a species that should not belong here, the song captain made absolutely no sound at all. What happens when the oldest singers in the universe finally fall silent? Come back for our next transmission to see what humanity is waiting to reveal.